The Golden State Killer Case. For decades, a man committed a series of rapes and murders across California that investigators could not connect into a single case until years after the crimes had stopped. Beginning in the mid-1970s, the offender operated first as a burglar, then as a rapist in Sacramento, then as a killer in Southern California, leaving behind more than 50 known sexual assault victims and at least 13 murder victims. Law enforcement had DNA from crime scenes, but no match in any database. The break came in 2018, when investigators uploaded the DNA profile to a public genealogy website and traced it through distant relatives to a retired police officer named Joseph James D'Angelo. He was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California, and later pleaded guilty to 13 counts of murder. The case was solved more than 40 years after the first known crimes and became a landmark moment in the use of genetic genealogy as an investigative tool. The BTK Killer Case. Dennis Rader murdered 10 people in and around Wichita, Kansas, between 1974 and 1991, binding, torturing, and killing his victims in a pattern that gave him the name BTK. He sent letters to newspapers and police throughout the 1970s, then went silent for years. Investigators assumed he might be dead or in prison. He resurfaced in 2004 with new communications, apparently emboldened by renewed media coverage of the cold case. In early 2005, he sent a floppy disk to a television station, apparently believing it could not be traced. Metadata on the disk led investigators directly to a church in Park City, Kansas, and to Rader, who was then the president of the congregation. He was arrested in February 2005, more than 30 years after his first known murder. He pleaded guilty to all 10 killings and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. The John Benet Ramsey Case. John Benet Ramsey was a 6-year-old beauty pageant participant found murdered in the basement of her family's home in Boulder, Colorado, on December 26, 1996. Her parents, John and Patsy Ramsey, found a ransom note, but John Benet's body was discovered hours later during a search of the property. The case became one of the most covered child murder investigations in American media history, and suspicion publicly focused on her parents for years. Neither was ever charged. In 2008, DNA testing on clothing found at the scene revealed an unknown male profile that did not match any family member, effectively clearing the Ramseys. Patsy Ramsey had died of cancer in 2006 without seeing that outcome. The case remains unsolved, with the unknown DNA profile still unmatched in any database decades later. The Jimmy Hoffa disappearance. Jimmy Hoffa was one of the most powerful labor union leaders in American history, having led the International Brotherhood of Teamsters through much of the mid-20th century. He disappeared on July 30, 1975, after going to a restaurant parking lot in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, for what appeared to be a meeting. He was never seen again. Investigators believed organized crime was responsible, given Hoffa's well-documented connections to mob figures. Over the decades, numerous tips and informants pointed to various locations where his remains might be buried, including fields, homes, and construction sites. None of those searches ever produced physical evidence. He was declared legally dead in 1982, but his disappearance was never solved. The case has remained one of the most persistent open mysteries in American criminal history, investigated periodically but never closed. The Grim Sleeper Case. Between 1985 and 2007, a serial killer in South Los Angeles murdered at least 10 women, most of them black, with a gap in known activity during the 1990s that gave him the name the Grim Sleeper. The case received relatively little mainstream media attention for years, a fact that critics attributed to the race and social circumstances of the victims. Investigators had DNA from crime scenes, but no match. In 2010, California expanded the use of familial DNA searching, allowing investigators to look not just for exact matches, but for close relatives of potential suspects already in the database. That search identified a partial match to a man whose son, Lonnie Franklin Jr., was already in the system. Franklin was arrested in 2010, more than 25 years after the first known murder. He was convicted in 2016 and sentenced to death. True stories like these leave many questions unanswered. If you want to keep following along, subscribe to the channel and participate in the comments. The West Memphis Theree case. In 1993, 3 8-year-old boys were found murdered in a drainage ditch in West Memphis, Arkansas. 3 local teenagers, Damian Eccles, Jason Baldwin, and Jesse Miskelly, were arrested and convicted largely on the basis of a disputed confession from Miskelly and what prosecutors characterized as an interest in occult materials. Eccles was sentenced to death, the others to life in prison. For years, supporters argued the convictions were based on moral panic rather than solid evidence, and the case attracted international attention through documentary films. New forensic analysis eventually challenged the original evidence, and DNA testing found no genetic material linking the 3 men to the crime scene. In 2011, after 18 years of imprisonment, all 3 entered Alford pleas, a legal arrangement acknowledging prosecutors had evidence to convict while maintaining personal innocence, and were released with time served. The Tylenol murders case. In the fall of 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area died after taking Tylenol capsules that had been laced with potassium cyanide. The bottles had been purchased from different stores across the region, suggesting the tampering had occurred after the products left the manufacturer. The case caused nationwide panic, led to the immediate recall of 31 million bottles of Tylenol, and permanently changed how over-the-counter medications were packaged, introducing tamper-evident seals that are now standard across the entire pharmaceutical industry. Despite a lengthy investigation and a prime suspect named James Lewis, who sent an extortion letter to the manufacturer, no one was ever charged with the actual poisonings. Lewis was convicted of extortion, but always denied involvement in the deaths. The murders remain officially unsolved more than 4 decades later. The Sam Sheppard Case. In 1954, osteopath Sam Sheppard was convicted of murdering his pregnant wife Marilyn in their Bay Village, Ohio, home, claiming a bushy-haired intruder had attacked them both. The case was sensationalized in the press before and during the trial, and Sheppard served 10 years before the Supreme Court overturned his conviction in 1966, ruling the trial had been compromised by excessive media coverage. He was retried and acquitted. Sheppard died in 1970. Decades later, his son pursued the case through the civil courts, seeking a formal declaration of innocence. DNA evidence pointed to a window washer named Richard Eberling, who had worked at the home and died in prison in 1998 while serving time for another murder. The civil case ultimately failed to produce a legal declaration, and Marilyn Sheppard's murder remains officially unsolved. The Tupac Shakur murder case. Tupac Shakur was shot multiple times while riding in a car in Las Vegas on September 7, 1996, following a Mike Tyson boxing match, and died 6 days later. He was 25 years old and one of the most prominent figures in hip-hop. Despite dozens of potential witnesses and years of investigation, no one was ever charged. The killing occurred in the middle of a well-documented feud between East Coast and West Coast factions of the music industry. A 2023 development came when Las Vegas police served a search warrant on the home of Dwayne Keith Davis, a former member of the Mob Piru Bloods gang, as part of a renewed investigation. Davis had previously made statements in a book and podcast suggesting involvement. The case nearly 3 decades after the shooting, remained without a conviction, though the renewed activity signaled it had not been permanently shelved. The Black Dahlia Case. On January 15, 1947, the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short was found in a vacant lot in Los Angeles, severed at the waist and completely drained of blood. The case became one of the most infamous solved murders in American history, generating enormous press coverage and a nickname that has endured for decades. Investigators interviewed hundreds of suspects in the months and years that followed, and numerous individuals over the decades have confessed or been accused without any charge ever being filed. The crime scene showed evidence of considerable planning, suggesting someone with anatomical knowledge, but no definitive suspect ever emerged. The case file remains open with the Los Angeles Police Department. More than 75 years after her death, Elizabeth Short's killer has never been identified.